Hello and welcome to Of Significance, the podcast about what's relevant, what's important, and what's meaningful. It's where we address whether the numbers and analytics we see daily are incredibly useful or nearly insignificant. I'm your every person host, Brent Buckwright, here with Dr. Nathan Woods and the regression analysis kid, Dr. Steve Bronars, experienced economists who have been analyzing big data since before it was big. Nathan and Steve, how are you guys?
I'm doing well. The regression kid. I like that.
I like that.
So I'm the one who's got something on tap for today. In April of 2024, the Supreme Court lowered the standard needed to challenge a job transfer in the case of Muldrow versus the city of St. Louis. And this court case expanded the interpretation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act to cover changes in the terms and conditions of employment that brought some harm based on discrimination against a protected characteristic, which contrasts to the previous standard that the plaintiffs need to show significant harm. The allegation in this case is police officer Jatoya Muldrow claimed her employer, the St. Louis Police Department, impermissibly transferred her from a premier position in the department to a less prestigious and more administrative one because she was a woman. So the plaintiff's rank and pay remained the same in her new position, but she alleged that her responsibilities, her perks, her schedule did not, and a male officer ended up in her prior position. So my first question for you two is, it seems like transfers are just another part of an employment process. What is it about them that makes them different from other practices we more commonly analyze?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the way I would start is, transfers. Certainly, we've analyzed transfers before. We've analyzed assignment decisions, including initial assignment upon hire, promotion type decisions. All of these have something to do with somebody getting a role in a job in a department that we would start off by saying is that an improved setting, right? So promotion, it's in the name, so we know that it's theoretically a good thing for the person that they'd want. Something like initial assignment, it may not be as clear. You're going to this department or that department or this particular job or that particular job. You may not know. So we'll start off by saying, is that a better outcome than some other outcome that the person might have had? And we'll analyze it in that way. We'll look at whether or not there are differences between protected and non-protected group members in their assignment to that better thing. And what do we mean by better? It probably is better paid. You can look at the pay of the people in those jobs or departments and compare them. You could get a little bit more sophisticated if you needed to, and look at over time. What are the outcomes over time? Maybe you start at the same rate, but the ceiling is higher in this particular department. So after 5 years, you're going to be better off than in job A than in job B. So that's the way we would start the regular kind of analysis. I don't know that the transfer situation that she's in is amenable to that exactly, because that information that we'd be using, the rank and the salary, I think we're the same. So it gets into some of these other factors that are maybe not as easy to see reflected in the data.
And I think the other thing, again, this is my understanding, what people have written about in this decision, is that it's not just transfers. That was in this particular case, but it could include a lot of different employment decisions that may be viewed as a negative outcome for the person, but not lead to significant harm. So it could be, we're moving you to the night shift, or you're going from a hybrid schedule to you have to come into the office, or we're changing your supervisory responsibilities, or a whole host of things that we wouldn't normally have thought about analyzing, like we would initial assignment, promotion, and even transfers. So if like changing your work schedule or where your office is located and a whole bunch of other things all could be used to say I was discriminated against, I think it means that the employers need to keep track of how these decisions are being made, and because it could be an issue if one of your employees accuses you of making discriminatory decisions when it comes to these uh, quite a wide range of possible employment decisions.
Right. So if I'm a business and I'm trying to approach keeping track of this information, or I'm on our side of it trying to analyze it, how do I think about the considerations that are going to be important for analyzing data or getting the data in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, Steve makes a good point. That's a long list, and there's lots of things he didn't mention that I guess we
Right.
could sit here and think about. And so it is a challenge, I think, for any company to think about gathering data on somebody's interest in those things. That's a long list of things to keep
Right.
track
So
of.
Muldrow had some other things that she had listed were affected as a result of this transfer. So no longer working with high-ranking officials on certain policies. She lost access to an unmarked take-home vehicle, and she had a less regular schedule involving weekend shifts. The weekend shifts, maybe that's something you could keep track of. Maybe you could keep track of if someone has, a vehicle rented out.
I hope they keep track of the vehicle.
But like the office location you have or the closeness you might have to supervisors seems like a pretty hard factor that may be important and may not. But
I think you would focus on the kind of things that, I mean, modern HR systems keep a lot of information in there. So changing departments, changing locations, shifts that you're working, supervisory responsibilities. So I think you would want to start with those things that you're already tracking. But Nathan brings up a really good point, which is that, when there are changes that are being made, you have to be interested in making that change and view that change as being a positive in order to say that was a good outcome, and you'd have to view that change as being negative. You're going to say I was discriminated against because of exactly the same change. We talk about this all the time in labor economics. Like, is working outside, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, for some people, they view that as a positive. They get to be outdoors, and that it's viewed as a positive. For others, they would view it as a negative. The schedule that you work, it's not the same as being paid more. Like Nathan's saying, like everybody presumably wants to get paid more, but then you would look at it and say, well, what does that come with it? Do I have to have different responsibilities or longer hours or whatever? So it's very difficult to be able to just rank order these different outcomes of this transfer process or whatever the process is, and say, well, here are the good outcomes and here are the not so good outcomes, because it's a little bit in the eye of the beholder.
so how do you analyze it then? I mean, when we're working, we're often trying to evaluate if a class is an appropriate grouping for some claim. Is there a class possible definition here? Is this even analyzable at a group level?
Well, I think whether you're actually in a litigation or somebody's trying to be proactive and we're working with them on a consulting basis, you're starting with the group of people that you could attempt to study this question for. I think there are a couple things I would say companies could do proactively, and maybe I'll leave it to Steve to talk about how likely or unlikely those would be to kind of meet some kind of class certification threshold. But the proactively, you could certainly just keep a handle, assuming you did have data, and if it were the transfers as opposed to the office assignments, although you could theoretically do office assignments as well, and you could be looking at that and just asking at regular intervals, do I see a difference in the rates of transfer between men and women, or other protected groups and non-protected groups? And if there are, you'd study it further to figure out if maybe those are systematically, adverse, or maybe they weren't at all, and nobody really was harmed. And I think you could get a little bit, deeper into it and look at not just who's getting transferred, but then, part of the story in this case is who came in. I think it was somebody who was a buddy of the supervisor, right? It was a male who was a friend of the supervisor. You could look at whether or not there's a difference in the demographic profile of the people who are newly occupying the role that the transferred person left behind. And if you saw some systematic differences there, that would warrant some additional review. I think that's the way I would think about it from a proactive standpoint. Now, what about class certification, Steve?
Well, I think
regression kid.
Should companies start keeping track of who's friends in the office? That way you can always just check with HR. Oh yeah, we are friends. Yeah.
As Nathan said, one of the pieces of information in this case was that when she was transferred out of this more prestigious position, the person who took her place was a man. And so when we would be looking at initial assignments or promotion, it's not only, okay, you didn't get the promotion or assignment that you wanted. Well, who got it in your place? And if it's a person who is of the member of the same protected group, a woman or a person of color of the same group, it's hard to make the case that the reason they got the position and you didn't was because of that status, that demographic characteristic. So I do think that you have to identify who's actually interested in it, who views this as a better position. So you almost have to have data that says, okay, I'm going to put my name in the hat. I use that expression all the time. I would like to be considered for this position. And then you'd have to have someone review it. Okay, are you qualified for it? And then once we're down to that, we can start thinking about looking at the data. And then are there enough of these decisions that you're making for similar kinds of reassignments, initial assignments, promotions, transfers, that you could try to say that you could group these together in a single kind of analysis to do a class-wide statistical study? And, that's going to be a pretty high standard that you'd have to meet in order to do that, because, as I said, there's a wide variety of these kind of employment decisions that fall under this umbrella now. And so you would want to be looking at ones that at least were, for the same type of movement, the same type of transfer. But I do think it would be pretty difficult. It seems to me quite individualized based on, when you think about a lot of these examples.
Right. Just the idea that whatever the thing is for one person might be good, for somebody else might be bad, and ascertaining that.
Yeah, everyone could be transferred down to worse position or transferred to worse positions involuntarily.
Yeah, and I think that even when there are trade-offs, so even though there might be some aspects of the transfer that you go, well, this is better because I have these opportunities, they might come with other sacrifices that you have to make. So it's going to be a very, I think, more difficult process to evaluate that than just we're doing the same work and I'm getting paid less to do the same work than someone else. Everybody would like to get paid more to do the same work. So that's where it would be much easier to say that's everybody would prefer to be paid more. No one really wants to get paid less. Whereas these other kind of decisions involve all sorts of nuances.
So I think the last question I have is, do you have any thoughts on the court stating that the harm does not need to be significant?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I think they said that because of our podcast, right?
I think so. I think they listen. As we said in an earlier episode, when we use the word as statisticians, significant, we really mean something. So when you look at it, it doesn't have to be a significant harm. Does that mean the pay difference could be statistically insignificant and you can still sue?
Oh, I think, and in this case, it was the pay. There was some
zero is statistically insignificant, right?
I hope so.
Right.
So there was a zero difference, and she still sued, and they found for her, right? So the harm is something other than the pay difference that we would usually be analyzing.
Right. So any kind of difference in your employment outcome, I suppose if you said I didn't get that and I would have been paid less, I don't think that is something that you would sue. But the pay difference could be zero. It could be what's considered insignificant, either practically or statistically. And if the reason that you didn't get that position was because of discrimination, it's covered by the Civil Rights Act. I think that's what it says. So I do think that that's quite important.
Are there any other questions, any other ways that we want to lay out last thoughts on this?
I would say it is interesting to me because some of the discussion here is about the prestige of the position that you're in. I haven't seen anybody talk about this, but suppose you were assured you're going to get paid the same at the end, but we're going to switch you from salaried to hourly, and you have to you have to swipe in and swipe out with your hours. And you go like, I don't want to do that. I guess if everybody has to do that, you couldn't sue. But if you just single out somebody, you go like, Nathan, I need you to punch a time clock and we're going to pay you by the hour. And you go, I don't like that. You could sue, right?
That it seems like that. Sure.
Yeah.
The effects of this case are uncertain. It could become a more common type of lawsuit. It might not. So we'll just have to wait and see. And obviously, we will be here to update our stat pack on any of the important news associated with it. And I think that's it for Of Significance. Well, that's been this episode of Significance. This episode's been brought to you by Edgeworth Economics, a leader in economic consulting, and with the help of our producers, Kimberly Krewald, Ryan Deal, and Brian McLamara of Brand Ready Media, with music by Armwell Lang. Thanks for listening, Stat Pack, and always remember to check your assumptions.